Title 8 USC 1324 III, whatever that is, does Idaho plan to enforce immigration laws locally to hold accountable NGOs, business owners who hire, harbor, transport, aid criminal illegals?
If I have my way, they will. I don't know how to answer that other than that.
So let's dive deeper. How? If you have your way, what does it look like?
It would come right now. It is a crime, and it's a misdemeanor with a $3,000 fine. Some of the industries involved, they don't care. They can pay it and move on. So we need to make these hurt. And we have to give our local jurisdictions the authority to reach into these people's lives. Right now, officers can't really even probe. There was a bill on the House that was brought by somebody else on the House floor at the end of the session. It got tremendous pushback, and all it would have done is given local law enforcement the ability upon a stop and suspected illegal, not here legally, the ability to categorize them, and on the second offense, ship them. We don't have anything. We don't have that mechanism because we've treated it. The federal government does have the jurisdiction over immigration, but they don't have the jurisdiction over an invasion, and that's what's taking place in our states and others. So we will do it through law.
Carl, you want to speak on that from the Senate standpoint?
I think Phil, Dale has done a wonderful job in his introduction and just now. I will support any of those efforts when it comes to the Senate.
Anybody else want to speak on this question before I modify it?
I need to speak because it's difficult to try and balance the due process necessary. Do you want to be able to walk out of your car and be confronted by a law enforcement officer, an armed individual, to show your papers? Where do we begin? I started working with one constituent about making it illegal to transport an illegal alien on a state highway. But then how many constitutional rights are we possibly offending, violating by this kind of stop and seize? So if we begin with genuflection to the sheriff, if we begin in the jails, if we begin in the workhouses, if we begin in the industries where we know they are, that's one thing. But to be stopping people under suspicion, then we've got some other due process and constitutional rights we're concerned about. So I'm just suggesting that it kind of bothers me a little bit that we're allowing law enforcement, or we're talking about allowing law enforcement this kind of authority without some guardrails. That's all. Thank you.
Do you have some thoughts on what those guardrails should look like?
Well, you'd have to stick with the constitutional requirements of, the way the procedure is criminally for stopping and for arresting. Where are the lines drawn? Where is there reasonable suspicion? These things are already in place. As long as we're assured that they stay in place as we go through this process, very important. I think what has happened has been diabolical in the sense that whatever steps we take are on the verge of violating citizens' constitutional rights, and that's the fine line I'm concerned about.
Two comments. Many of us up here just got back from a policy conference. Immigration used to be dealt with at the state. That eventually got all transferred to the federal government. We need to transfer that back to the state. It is our responsibility. And a way we could do this is start with the industry that Dale mentioned. 70% of their employees are illegal. Why are we allowing that? Why is our state not pushing back on that? And that should be a priority.
Let me add this question because this was asked. What is your position on E-Verify? Because I think the point is well taken. We don't want our police to just stop and ask for papers. If I'm hearing correctly the consensus from many of you in your opening statements, this is during the employment process. And is E-Verify not one of those mechanisms? And can you speak about that from a legislative position?
I would like to address the previous question first. The U.S. Constitution delineates those functions that are limited to only the federal government, and immigration is one of those. There is a caveat, however, and that is in the case of invasion, and we certainly are being invaded with the tens of millions of illegal aliens here. when Phil Hart presented a bill in the Senate and I was his sponsor in the House, we had a conversation in one of the committees and pointed out the large number of illegal immigrants here and some of their favorite target cities, Denver, New York City. There are 40,000 in Denver alone. They're overrunning the education system, the medical system. They swamp the emergency departments to the point where people who have real emergencies can't get that emergency help in a reasonable amount of time. And so these are immigrants that are using those services on regular medical issues because they don't have a doctor and can't afford one. The ACLU lawyer who testified against our bill or our compact stated that in Idaho there's only 35,000 illegal immigrants, and it's a stable population, and they're good, hardworking folks, and we should have human respect for them. I have respect for every human until they break the law, and that's where it ends.
Now, let me sweeten the pot here just a little bit, because as I understand it, so far it's just a rumor, but we have one county a little further south in our state that is taking up sanctuary status for illegals. Where are you folks with regards to sanctuary, city, county, whatever? And as a legislator, what can or will you do about it?
Well, I think it goes right back to the budget process. If they want money from the state or I think the federal, I think that there's a potential that there's going to be a wall. If you don't comply with the state policy, you're not going to get any money from the state. And I think the federal government, I think Trump will go in that same direction, given the size of some of these cities that are talking this way. It's simple. It boils down to you need grants, you don't get them. And that will make them squeal.
Elaine, what about you? Let's move the mic further down this way. You haven't spoke for a while.
Talking with Heather, there are ways that the state can handle this. I have not heard of anybody in the state wanting to do this, but I agree that enforcement is a key issue with a lot of the laws that we have. We put laws in the books, but we don't enforce them. And so we need to make sure that they are being enforced, and if they're not, back to what other people have said, they've got to feel the impact of their decisions, and I will be part of that solution.
Doug, any final thoughts on this before we change topics?
Yeah, sure. I think you raised an interesting point on the sanctuary city. It strikes me that the state probably could pass a law that said no city in our state can be a sanctuary city. I think it would be an interesting question for the courts. I'm not sure it would end up running against or potentially running afoul of federal authority. But I think there's a good argument that would fall under states' rights. So that might be something we could do to address that issue. So I'm sure we can chat about that later. On the other issue, I think maybe the other thing we should probably be trying to do is, with the very successful election that we just had at the federal level, I think that it's probably a good time for us to reach out to our federal delegation and see what laws they can perhaps put through that might empower or better empower local law enforcement to help enforce immigration laws, because at this point they are really running up against federal lack of enforcement.
Great, thank you so much, appreciate that. Now, let's change topics. Another issue